In the remote wilderness of Montana, where vast stretches of untamed land still hold secrets from another time, and ancient traditions sometimes clash with modern understanding, there are moments when the past and present collide in ways that challenge everything we think we know about justice, family, and human dignity. For some people, isolated by geography and bound by customs that outsiders cannot easily comprehend, the line between tradition and cruelty can become dangerously blurred. This is the story of Tom Mitchell, a solitary rancher who had built his life around the rhythms of the land and the company of his animals, and 16-year-old Ayanna Blackfeather, a Native American girl whose refusal to accept an arranged marriage had led her own family to take desperate and shocking measures. When a routine ride through his property brought Tom face to face with an act of unthinkable brutality disguised as cultural tradition, his decision to intervene would set in motion events that would transform not just their lives, but challenge an entire community to examine the difference between honoring heritage and perpetuating harm. Sometimes the most important moral choices we make are the ones that force us to stand against practices that have been accepted for generations, even when doing so means challenging people and systems we don't fully understand. Before we dive into this powerful story of courage, cultural conflict, and the universal fight for human dignity, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. Thomas Mitchell had been riding the fence lines of his sprawling Montana ranch for over 2 decades, ever since inheriting the property from his grandfather at the age of 25. Now 47, he possessed the kind of deep familiarity with every acre of his land that came from years of careful stewardship and genuine love for the wild, rugged landscape that stretched from his property boundaries to the distant peaks of the Rocky Mountains. On this particular morning in late August, the sky was brilliant blue, and the air carried the crisp promise of autumn despite the summer heat. Tom had saddled his favorite horse Dakota before dawn, planning to check on a section of fence damaged in a recent storm and count cattle in the remote pastures, where predators sometimes posed problems. As he rode through a dense grove of cottonwood trees that marked the boundary between his property and reservation land, Tom heard something that made him pull Dakota to a stop. It was a faint whimpering that suggested an animal in distress, possibly injured or trapped. His first thought was that one of his cattle might have wandered into the grove and become entangled. Following the sound deeper into the trees, Tom discovered something that made his blood run cold. Tied to a large cottonwood tree with thick rope was a young Native American girl, probably no more than 16 or 17 years old. She was conscious but clearly exhausted, her long black hair hanging in tangles around her face, her traditional clothing torn and dirty from what appeared to have been a struggle. The girl's eyes widened with fear when she saw Tom approaching, and she tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse and barely audible. The ropes around her wrists and ankles had been tied with permanent knots, and the raw, bleeding wounds where the rope had cut into her skin indicated that she had been bound for many hours. "Easy," Tom said softly, dismounting from Dakota and approaching slowly with his hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Tom Mitchell, and I'm going to get you out of here." The girl watched him warily as he pulled a knife from his belt and began carefully cutting through the ropes. As the restraints fell away, she collapsed forward, her legs too weak to support her weight after hours of being tied upright. Tom caught her before she could fall, noting that she was shivering despite the morning warmth. "Water," she whispered, the first word she had managed to speak clearly. Tom quickly retrieved a canteen from his saddlebags and helped her drink slowly, recognizing the signs of someone who had been without water for too long. As she drank, he examined the rope burns on her wrists and ankles, feeling anger build in his chest. "What's your name?" Tom asked gently. "Ayanna," she replied, her voice still hoarse but growing stronger. "Ayanna Blackfeather." "Ayanna, can you tell me who did this to you?" The girl's expression darkened, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. When she spoke, her words carried a mixture of pain, anger, and betrayal. My family, she said simply. My own family did this to me. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Your family? Why would your family tie you to a tree? Ayanna took a shaky breath before continuing, clearly struggling with both physical exhaustion and emotional trauma. There is a man named Joseph Running Bear who wants to marry me. He's much older, almost 40, and he already has one wife, but he has offered my father many horses and money for me to become his second wife. I refused because I want to finish school, go to college, maybe become a teacher or nurse. But my father says I'm being selfish, that I must honor our traditions. Tom listened with growing horror as Ayanna continued her story, describing weeks of pressure and increasingly desperate attempts by her family to force her compliance. Yesterday, when I told my father again that I would never marry Joseph Running Bear, he became very angry. He said I was bringing shame to our family. He said if I would not choose to honor our ways, then I would learn what happens to girls who reject their responsibilities. So they brought you out here and tied you to this tree. My father, my uncle, and my older brother. They said I would stay here until I came to my senses and agreed to the marriage. They said when I was ready to accept Joseph Running Bear as my husband, someone would come for me. Tom felt rage building in his chest at the thought of grown men leaving a 16-year-old girl tied to a tree as punishment for refusing an arranged marriage. Whatever cultural traditions might be involved, this was abuse of the worst kind. Ayanna, he said, what they did to you is wrong. I don't care what traditions they claim to be following. Tying a child to a tree is abuse, and it's illegal. You could have died out here. Ayanna looked at him with surprise, as if the idea that her treatment might be considered wrong had never occurred to her. But Mr. Mitchell, these are our ways. My father says I am being influenced by white ideas about education that will make me forget who I am. Ayanna, Tom said firmly, wanting an education and the right to choose your own husband doesn't make you less Native American. It makes you a person with hopes and dreams who deserves the chance to build the life you want. And no tradition that involves leaving a child tied to a tree is worth preserving. As they talked, Tom was forming a plan. He couldn't simply return Ayanna to her family, knowing they would likely repeat this punishment. But he also recognized that removing a Native American minor from reservation land without authorization could create legal complications. Ayanna, he said, I want to help you, but I need to understand what you want. Do you want me to take you back to your family? No, she said immediately, fear flashing in her eyes. If you take me back, they will just find another way to make me agree to marry Joseph Running Bear. Then what do you want me to do? Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. I want to go to school. I want to learn enough to help my people in ways that don't require me to sacrifice everything I hope for myself. But I don't know how to do that when my own family is against me. Tom made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Ayanna, I can't take you back to people who would tie you to a tree for refusing an arranged marriage. But I can offer you a safe place to stay while we figure out how to get you the help and protection you need. You can stay at my ranch, and we'll contact social services to make sure your rights are protected. But what about your reputation? What about the problems this might cause? Let me worry about that, Tom said, helping Ayanna to her feet. Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you somewhere safe. As they rode back toward Tom's ranch house, Ayanna clinging to him on Dakota's back, both of them knew that this moment would have consequences neither could fully predict. Tom was taking in a Native American minor without authorization, potentially creating legal and social complications. Ayanna was choosing rescue over submission, education over tradition, and individual freedom over family loyalty. But as they crested the hill that brought Tom's ranch house into view, both of them also knew that some choices were more important than their consequences. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the most difficult thing to do, and sometimes protecting someone's fundamental human dignity required taking risks that could change everything. Building trust. The first week of Ayana's stay at Tom's ranch was marked by careful navigation of cultural sensitivities, legal complexities, and the delicate process of helping a traumatized teenager begin to trust again after being betrayed by her own family. Tom had immediately contacted both social services and tribal authorities, wanting to ensure that his actions were viewed as protection rather than kidnapping. Social services confirmed that what had happened to Ayana constituted child abuse and that she had the right to protection from further harm, but they also acknowledged that removing a Native American minor from reservation land involved jurisdictional issues that required careful handling. The tribal council was divided. Some members were horrified by the extreme measures Ayana's family had taken, while others viewed Tom's intervention as unwelcome interference by an outsider who didn't understand their customs. During those first days, Ayana was clearly intelligent and possessed of quiet strength, but she was also struggling with guilt over defying her family and uncertainty about whether she had made the right choice. She spent much of her time reading books from Tom's library, helping with light ranch chores when her rope burns had healed, and gradually sharing more of her story as she began to trust that Tom genuinely wanted to help. "Mr. Mitchell," she said one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Tom replied. "You can ask me anything." "But why did you help me? I mean, I understand you said it was the right thing to do, but helping me has caused you problems with the tribal council. Social services is investigating you, and some people in town are saying you shouldn't have gotten involved. Wouldn't it have been easier to just not see me?" Tom considered her question carefully. "Ayana, when I found you tied to that tree, I didn't see a Native American girl, or a tribal issue, or a cultural complication. I saw a human being who was suffering and needed help. Everything else, the politics, the jurisdictional questions, the social complications, those are problems for adults to solve, but a 16-year-old girl being left to die in the wilderness, that's not a problem, that's an emergency." Ayana was quiet for a moment. "But don't you think about the fact that I'm not your responsibility, that I have my own people and family, even if they did something terrible?" "Ayana," Tom said gently, "responsibility isn't just about blood relations or ethnic identity. When you have the power to help someone and you choose not to use that power, you become responsible for whatever happens to them. I had the power to help you, so helping you became my responsibility, even if it means going against my family's wishes. Especially if it means going against wishes that involve tying children to trees," Tom said firmly. "There are some things that are wrong regardless of who is doing them or what traditions they claim to be following." Over the following days, their conversations revealed more about both their backgrounds. Ayana shared stories about growing up on the reservation, describing the pride she felt in her heritage and her deep connections to traditional knowledge and spiritual practices, while also expressing frustration with aspects of tribal culture that seemed to limit opportunities for young women who wanted education and independence. "I love my people," she explained. "I love our language, our ceremonies, our connection to the land, but I also love learning about science and literature and history. I want to go to college and maybe become a doctor or teacher who can help bring modern knowledge back to the reservation. Some of the elders say this makes me too influenced by white culture, but I think knowledge is knowledge, regardless of where it comes from." Tom, in turn, shared something of his own background, his childhood on the ranch with grandparents who had taught him to respect the land and its original inhabitants, his brief marriage to a woman who had found ranch life too isolated, and the years of solitude that had followed. "But having you here," he admitted, "has reminded me that peace without purpose is just another kind of emptiness. Taking care of cattle and maintaining property is satisfying work, but it's not the same as taking care of people and being part of something larger than yourself." Their developing relationship was tested when Ayana's uncle, Robert Blackfeather, arrived at the ranch unannounced on a Thursday morning, accompanied by 2 other tribal members. Tom had been expecting this confrontation, but he was still unprepared for the intensity of the anger Robert brought with him. "Mitchell," Robert said without preamble, "you have stolen our daughter and filled her head with ideas that dishonor her family and her people. This stops today." "Mr. Blackfeather," Tom replied evenly, "I didn't steal anyone. I found Ayanna tied to a tree where your family left her to suffer, and I provided medical attention and shelter. She's free to leave any time she chooses. She is 16 years old, and she belongs with her family, not with some white rancher who thinks he knows what's best for Indian children." Ayanna, who had heard the raised voices, came out onto the porch. Her presence immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation. "Uncle Robert," she said quietly, "I'm not going back. I'm not marrying Joseph Running Bear, and I'm not letting anyone tie me to trees or hurt me because I want an education." Robert's expression shifted from anger to something that looked like pain. "Ayanna, you don't understand what you're throwing away. Joseph Running Bear is a respected man with horses and money. You would be provided for, protected. Uncle Robert, I would be the second wife of a man I don't love, probably pregnant before I turn 18, with no chance to finish school or learn skills that could help our people. How is that honoring anything except Joseph Running Bear's desire to own a young woman?" The conversation that followed was difficult and emotional, with Robert attempting to explain tribal customs, while Ayanna firmly articulated her own vision for her future. Tom mostly listened, recognizing that this was fundamentally a conversation between Ayanna and her family about values that would define the rest of her life. "Ayanna," Robert said finally, "if you refuse this marriage, if you continue to live with this white man and pursue these white ideas about education, you will bring shame on our family. The tribal council will have to consider whether you are still one of our people." "Uncle Robert," Ayanna replied, tears flowing but her voice steady, "if being one of your people means accepting abuse and giving up my dreams, then maybe I need to find a different way to honor my heritage." After Robert and the other tribal members left, Ayanna and Tom sat in his kitchen, processing what had just happened. "I've lost my family," Ayanna said quietly. "They're going to cut me off, declare me dead to them." "Ayanna," Tom said, "families aren't just the people you're born to. They're also the people who choose to love and support you. You haven't lost your family. You've discovered that some of the people you thought were family weren't willing to love you unconditionally. But what if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm throwing away everything important for dreams that might not come true?" Tom looked at the young woman who had shown such courage in standing up for her future. "Ayanna, the only mistake you could make is letting other people's fear prevent you from becoming the person you're meant to be. Your dreams matter. Your education matters. Your right to choose your own path matters." As they settled into their new routine, both Tom and Ayanna realized that their relationship had evolved beyond rescuer and victim. They were becoming something like family, not bound by blood or tribal affiliation, but by choice, respect, and shared commitment to protecting each other's right to live with dignity and purpose. The legal battle. 6 months after Tom found Ayanna tied to the tree, their situation had evolved into a complex legal battle that was testing not only their resolve, but also challenging both the tribal community and the broader county to examine their assumptions about tradition, authority, and individual rights. What had begun as an emergency rescue had become a precedent-setting case that attracted attention from civil rights lawyers, Native American advocacy groups, and media outlets. The immediate crisis had been resolved when a federal judge granted Ayanna temporary emancipated minor status, allowing her to live independently while pursuing her education. But the broader questions raised by her case were far from settled. Joseph Running Bear had filed a lawsuit claiming that Tom had interfered with a legitimate marriage contract, while Ayanna's father had petitioned the tribal court to force her return to the reservation. Through all of this legal complexity, Tom and Ayanna had maintained their partnership with Tom serving as both her legal guardian and her strongest advocate, while Ayana pursued her education with determination that impressed everyone who worked with her. She had enrolled in an accelerated high school program and was already taking college-level courses online in preparation for applying to universities. But the legal battles were taking their toll. Tom's ranch had become a focal point for protesters from both sides, some supporting Ayana's right to self-determination, others demanding that she be returned to tribal authority. The stress was wearing on Tom's normally calm demeanor, while Ayana struggled with guilt over the disruption her choice was causing. "Tom," she said one evening as they reviewed correspondence from their lawyer, "maybe I should just go back. Maybe I should accept the marriage and end all of this conflict." Tom looked up from the legal documents and saw the exhaustion in Ayana's eyes. She had been strong for so long, but the constant pressure was beginning to wear down even her remarkable resilience. "Ayana," he said gently, "do you want to marry Joseph Running Bear? Do you want to give up your education and spend the rest of your life as someone's second wife?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm tired of being the reason for so much anger and division." "This fight is worth fighting," Tom said firmly, "not just for you, but for every other young woman who might face the same choice. What we're doing here isn't just about your individual case. It's about establishing the principle that cultural tradition cannot be used to justify abuse or forced marriage." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Tom opened it to find Sarah Whitehawk, a Native American lawyer who had been following Ayana's case and had requested this meeting to discuss what she described as an important development. "Ms. Whitehawk," Tom said, inviting her in, "thank you for coming. Ayana and I have been hoping you might have some good news." Sarah Whitehawk was a woman in her 30s who had grown up on the Crow Reservation before earning her law degree from Stanford and dedicating her career to protecting Native American rights. She had been working with Tom's lawyer to ensure that Ayana's case was handled respectfully. "I do have news," Sarah said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "But whether it's good news depends on how you look at it." "What kind of development?" Ayana asked, clearly bracing herself for another complication. "The Tribal Council has reached a decision about your case," Sarah said. "They're prepared to drop all demands for your return to the reservation and to publicly state that forced marriage is not consistent with modern tribal values." Joseph Running Bear has also agreed to withdraw his lawsuit. Tom felt a surge of relief, but he could see that Sarah's expression suggested the story was more complicated. "What's the catch?" he asked. "The catch is that in exchange for these concessions, the Tribal Council is asking for something significant in return. They want Ayana to make a public statement acknowledging that her family's actions were not representative of tribal culture, and they want her to commit to using her education to benefit the tribal community." Ayana looked thoughtful rather than relieved. "What exactly would that commitment involve?" They're proposing that you complete your education, college, medical school if that's what you choose, but that you agree to return to the reservation afterward to work as a healthcare provider for the tribal community. They want to turn your case into a model for how young tribal members can pursue modern education while still serving their people. Tom could see that Ayana was considering this proposal seriously. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I think," Ayana said slowly, "that it's exactly what I've always wanted to do anyway. I never wanted to leave my people permanently. I just wanted the right to choose how I could best serve them. If I can become a doctor and bring medical care back to the reservation, that honors both my heritage and my individual goals." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. "I was hoping you would see it that way. This proposal essentially gives you everything you've been fighting for while allowing the tribal leadership to save face and turn your case into something positive." "And what about Tom?" Ayana asked. "What happens to him in this arrangement?" "The Tribal Council acknowledges that Mr. Mitchell acted to protect you from harm and that his intervention was motivated by legitimate concern for your welfare. They're prepared to thank him publicly for his role in bringing attention to issues that needed to be addressed. Tom felt a complex mix of emotions as he processed this information. The legal battle that had consumed their lives for months was apparently coming to an end, and Ayana would be free to pursue her education without fear of forced marriage or family retribution. But the resolution also meant that their unusual family arrangement would eventually come to an end when Ayana left for college. Over the following week, Tom and Ayana worked together to prepare for what would essentially be a public testimony about their experiences and the lessons they had learned. For Ayana, it was an opportunity to explain her love for her heritage, while also articulating her right to pursue her own dreams. For Tom, it was a chance to address misunderstandings about his motivations and to express his respect for tribal sovereignty, while also affirming his commitment to protecting vulnerable individuals, regardless of their cultural background. The community gathering took place on a Saturday afternoon in late spring, held in the Tribal Community Center, with representatives from both the reservation and the broader county in attendance. When Ayana stood to speak, her voice was clear and strong. 6 months ago, my family tied me to a tree because I refused to accept a marriage that would have ended my education and my dreams of becoming a doctor. Today, I stand here as a free person who has been given the opportunity to serve my people in the way I believe I can be most helpful. She paused, looking out at an audience that included both supporters and critics. I want to be clear about something. What happened to me was not an example of tribal tradition. It was an example of what happens when fear and misunderstanding are allowed to override respect for individual dignity. True tradition honors both our heritage and our humanity. When Tom spoke, he focused on the broader lessons their experience had taught him. When I found Ayana tied to that tree, I didn't think about cultural complications or legal jurisdiction. I thought about a human being who needed help. I've learned since then that helping someone often requires understanding their culture and respecting their community, but it never requires accepting abuse or cruelty, regardless of what traditions are being invoked. The resolution of Ayana's case became a model for how communities could address conflicts between traditional practices and individual rights. But more importantly for Tom and Ayana personally, it marked the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. Ayana would be leaving for college in the fall, but their bond had become something that would endure beyond their shared living arrangement. Tom, Ayana said as they drove home from the community gathering, I need you to know that you didn't just save my life that day when you found me tied to the tree. You saved my future, my dreams, and my belief that there are people in the world who will fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. Ayana, Tom replied, you taught me that having the power to help someone creates the responsibility to use that power, and that sometimes the most important families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. A legacy of change. 2 years after Tom discovered Ayana tied to the tree, the ripple effects of their story continued to spread throughout both the tribal community and the broader region, creating changes that neither could have anticipated. Ayana had graduated high school with highest honors and was now in her 2nd year at Montana State University, majoring in pre-medicine while maintaining her commitment to return to the reservation as a healthcare provider. But their story had inspired something larger. The Tribal Council had established the Ayana Blackfeather Education Fund, providing scholarships for young tribal members who wanted to pursue higher education while serving their community. Social services had implemented new protocols for investigating cases involving cultural practices that might harm children, and several other young women had come forward to report forced marriage situations. Tom's ranch had become an unexpected center for these broader conversations. He had partnered with the Tribal Council to host annual conferences on balancing cultural preservation with individual rights, and his property now included a small guest house where young people from the reservation could stay while pursuing educational opportunities in town. On this particular morning in October, 2 years to the day, after Tom had found Ayana tied to the tree, he was preparing for a special celebration that would mark both the anniversary of their first meeting and Ayana's acceptance to the University of Montana Medical School. She had driven up from Bozeman the previous evening, bringing the acceptance letter that represented the culmination of everything they had fought for together. "Tom," Ayana said, joining him on the porch where he was watching the sunrise, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Tom asked, noting her serious expression. "When I finish medical school and return to work on the reservation, I want to establish a clinic that serves not just the tribal community, but also ranchers and farmers throughout this entire region. I want to create something that brings people together rather than keeping them separate." Tom smiled, recognizing in her words the same vision of bridge building that had characterized their entire relationship. "That sounds like exactly the kind of work you were meant to do. But I can't do it alone," Ayana continued. "I'm going to need partners, people who understand both the medical needs and the cultural complexities of serving diverse rural communities. I'm going to need advisors who can help navigate the politics and funding and inevitable resistance from people who prefer to keep communities separate." "I think you'll find there are more people willing to help than you might expect," Tom said. "Your story has shown a lot of people that we all benefit when we work together to protect and support each other." Tom," Ayana said, turning to face him directly, "I want you to be my partner in this project. I want you to help me build something that honors what we learned together about the importance of standing up for people who need protection." Tom felt a surge of emotion that reminded him of the moment 2 years earlier when he had first decided to cut Ayana free from that tree. Once again, he was being asked to make a choice that would change his life in unpredictable ways. And once again, the right choice was clear. "Ayana," he said, "I can't think of anything I'd rather do with the rest of my life than help you build something that makes the world a little more just and compassionate." As the celebration unfolded throughout the afternoon, Tom found himself reflecting on how completely his understanding of family, community, and purpose had been transformed. The ranch that had once been his refuge from human complications had become a gathering place where people from different backgrounds came together to solve problems and support each other's dreams. "Uncle Robert," Ayana said during the celebration, approaching the man who had once tried to force her back into an unwanted marriage, "I want you to know that I understand you were trying to protect our family's honor according to the traditions you were taught. But I also want you to understand that true honor comes from protecting people's right to live with dignity." Robert Blackfeather, now showing the wisdom that could come from confronting one's own mistakes, embraced his niece with tears in his eyes. "Ayana, I have learned that traditions must grow and change to remain meaningful. What you have accomplished, what you and Tom have built together, honors our people more than any forced marriage ever could have." As the celebration continued into the evening, Tom and Ayana found themselves walking together through the grove of cottonwood trees where their story had begun. The tree where she had been tied was now marked with a small plaque that read, "In honor of all who refuse to accept injustice and all who choose to help when help is needed." "Tom," Ayana said, standing near the tree that had once represented her imprisonment but now symbolized her liberation, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had decided not to investigate that sound you heard? If you had just assumed it was an animal and ridden on?" "I try not to think about that," Tom admitted. "But I know that finding you changed my life as much as it changed yours. You taught me that having the power to help someone creates the responsibility to use that power regardless of complications. And you taught me that families aren't just the people you're born to, they're also the people who choose to love and support you unconditionally." Oh, as they walked back toward the house where their friends and community members were still celebrating, Tom and Ayana reflected on the journey that had brought them from that desperate moment in the grove to this celebration of hope and achievement. The girl who had been tied to a tree for wanting an education was now preparing to become a doctor who would serve her community while maintaining her individual dignity and dreams. The rancher who had lived in isolation had discovered that the most meaningful work he could do was building bridges between communities and protecting people who needed advocates. Their story had become proof that individuals could challenge harmful practices while still honoring their heritage, that communities could evolve while maintaining their essential identity, and that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism happen not in grand gestures witnessed by thousands, but in quiet moments when someone simply refused to let cruelty triumph over compassion. This powerful story of Tom and Ayanna reminds us that moral courage often requires us to challenge practices that cause harm, even when those practices are defended as tradition. Their journey shows us that real progress happens when we protect individual dignity while building bridges between communities, and that the most meaningful changes often begin with one person's decision to act when action is needed. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories about justice, courage, and standing up for what's right. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from and share your thoughts about balancing respect for traditions with protecting individual rights. Remember, we all have the power to intervene when we witness injustice, and sometimes one person's courage can inspire an entire community to examine and improve their practices. Until next time, keep believing in the power of compassion to overcome cruelty.